Chapter 4 The Garden Wall. It was very early when Oliver rolled out of bed next day, sleepy but determined. He had decided at first to pay no attention to Anthony Crawford's suggestion, made evidently with malicious purpose. He had, indeed, almost forgotten it by the time he and Janet reached home. But Janet had remembered, and she had brought up the question that evening as they went up to their own quarters rather later than usual, since Cousin Jasper had been sitting with them in the library, and had seemed unwilling that they should leave him. "There is something very wrong in this house," declared Janet. "Hotchkiss doesn't know what it is. Mrs. Brown doesn't." "I think the bee-man knows," Oliver volunteered suddenly, although he could give no reason for his guess. "Anyway," pursued Janet, "someone ought to know, for someone ought to help Cousin Jasper. I am certain that he has no mean secrets, as Anthony Crawford said. And so I think one of us should climb up and look over the wall. It had better be you," she added wisely but regretfully, "because, if we both try it, someone is sure to see us." It was, therefore, Oliver who was stirring at sunrise, for his investigations must be made before anyone else was up. He let himself out of the house very quietly and crossed the empty, silent garden. He had forgotten how beautiful a garden could be in the early morning, with the dew shining on every grass tip and with the flowers all radiant in the vividness of color of newly created things. There were gay-colored beds below the terrace, and long borders at each side of the house, then a wide stretch of grass behind the garage, and beyond that, back of the shrubs and the fruit trees and the thickly growing vines, was the wall. It was higher than the boundaries at the sides in front of Cousin Jasper's place, perhaps to afford a better service for the grapevines and pear trees trained against it, perhaps for another reason. Oliver walked along it slowly, looking up at the smooth bricks and wondering how it was to be climbed. The more difficult it appeared, the more determined he became to get to the top. In the middle of the wall behind a summer house stood a stout trellis, the support of an exceedingly thorny rose vine. Here, he decided, was the place to scramble up, but he must make haste, for people in the house would be waking and would see him. Carefully he set a foot upon the lowest bar, found that it would hold, and began mounting upward. There were trees beyond the wall, not the trimmed, well-kept kind that grew in Cousin Jasper's garden, but a scrubby growth of box elder and silver-leaved poplar, such as spring up in myriads where the grass is never cut. Hanging over the top of the coping, he could peer through their branches and see a house beyond. He was astonished to see the shingled roof rising so close by, for he had not thought that they had neighbors who dwelt so near. The house was a square one of yellow stone, with overhanging eaves and small windows, and an old-fashioned stoop in front, over which the roof came down in a long sweep. It must have been built 100 years ago, he thought, and it might have seemed a charming, comfortable old place were it not so unutterably dejected and dingy. Its windows were cracked, the grass grew tall and ragged upon its lawns, a litter of rubbish lay about the back door, and the woodwork that should have been white was gray from want of paint. "It looks as though the people who lived in it just didn't care," Oliver commented. "It is a nice old house, but it seems worn out and discouraged, somehow, like John Massey's cottage. I wonder who owns it." An open space between the dwelling and the wall had apparently once been a broad lawn, then had been plowed up for the planting of a patch of grain, and had at last been left as a neglected waste for weeds and brambles to flourish undisturbed. An old scarecrow still stood knee-deep in the tangled green, left there after the field had been abandoned, to drop slowly to pieces in the wind and rain. The grotesque figure, with its outstretched arms and hat set at a rakish angle, looked familiar for some incomprehensible reason. As Oliver clung to the wall, squinted through the leaves, and wondered why that should be, the mystery was suddenly solved. The door of the house opened with a squeak of rusty hinges, and somebody came out on the step. It was Anthony Crawford. No wonder the scarecrow looked like its master, for it was wearing his old clothes, garments to which there always cling a vague resemblance to the person who once wore them. A child with very yellow hair came running out upon the doorstone, laughing aloud at some small joke of his very own. When he saw Anthony Crawford, however, he sobered suddenly and slipped back into the house without a sound. The man stood upon the step and stared, with narrowed, penetrating eyes, over toward the wall. The gables and chimneys of Cousin Jasper's big house must show through the trees from where he stood, and, judging by the look with which he regarded them, it seemed that he hated the very roof that sheltered Jasper Peyton. The luxurious mansion was, in truth, a sharp contrast to the unkempt, gone-to-seed yellow farmhouse, although Oliver wondered whether, originally, the old stone dwelling had not been the more attractive of the two. He leaned forward to see plainer, made an unwise move, and attracted the attention of the man on the step. The boy flushed scarlet as their eyes met, for Anthony Crawford, without making a sound, went through a pantomime of an ecstasy of glee. He had evidently expected to arouse Oliver's curiosity by his suggestion the day before, and was overcome with ill-natured delight to catch him in the very act of satisfying it. With a mutter of angry words, Oliver dropped back into the garden. "I wasn't looking just because he told me to. I wasn't," he kept repeating. As he walked toward the house, he looked back more than once at the high wall, wondering at the things it hid. Here was squalid poverty almost under the windows of the great, handsome house where Cousin Jasper lived with everything that heart could desire. It was the poverty, too, of a member of his own family. Here was jealous enmity also, a hatred that seemed to point ominously to trouble before them, to all the harm that could be accomplished by an angry, unscrupulous man. No wonder Cousin Jasper looked changed, and haunted. What hold did Anthony Crawford have upon his cousin? Why should one have so little and the other so much? Why did that high wall forbid all intercourse with that strange neighbor? It was plain to Oliver at last that their night ride through lanes and crossroads had been necessary, because the wall cut off any direct path, and that the goal of their expedition in the dark had been Anthony Crawford's sagging, one-hinged gate. The morning sun was rising higher, the cheerful sound of a grass cutter was going up and down the garden, and smoke was mounting from the kitchen chimney. With some care, lest he should be asked the cause of his scratched hands and torn sleeve, Oliver slipped into the house and sought his own room. He and Janet talked over all that he had seen, but they could make little of it, and were, indeed, more mystified than ever. At intervals during the day, they kept coming back to the subject and were still talking of it that evening, as they sat in the library with the long windows open upon the terrace and upon the flowering garden. They had come to no conclusion, however, when the study door opened and Cousin Jasper came toward them across the hall. He looked less troubled tonight, and was smiling as though he had been looking forward to this hour they were to spend together. Yet his face changed in a moment at the sound of rattling wheels on the drive, followed by the appearance of a troubled Hotchkiss at the door, with the reluctant question, "Will you see Mr. Crawford, sir?" The visitor had not waited, but came pushing in behind him. "We do not need to stand on ceremony," he said, "when it is all in the same family. These are your two guests, eh? You need not introduce them. We have met before. I saw the boy very recently, in fact. He seems to be an enterprising fellow, and was conducting some investigations of his own. Well, well, we won't talk of it now." Oliver writhed inwardly under his sharp glance, but could muster no appropriate reply. He was thinking again that Anthony Crawford might have been handsome, except for those restless gray eyes that were set too near together. Although his host was obviously anxious to lead him away to the study, the visitor planted himself in the middle of the library floor and stood his ground firmly. "Have you thought over my offer, Jasper?" he said. "Are you ready to give me my share, or shall I take all?" "I have given up what seemed your share," Jasper Peyton returned steadily, "and rather than quarrel with you further, I would gladly give you all. But I believe to shut one's eyes to justice is wrong, even in such a matter as this." The other's calm broke suddenly under the force of ungovernable anger. "You will be sorry," he cried. "You will lose more than those fat acres by the river and this fine house where you hoped to live so happily until I came. You won't give in, will you? Your high principles, or your stubbornness, will still hold you back from giving me what is mine? Then I can tell you that I will drag your good name down where my own stands. I will publish that disgrace of mine that you hushed up to save the family pride. You will have people looking into your own past. They will be saying, if one of the family was crooked, why not another? There is always a pack of gossips and scandal-mongers who are only too glad to snap at the heels of any prominent man. I will loose them all upon you, Jasper Peyton. Every one." He stopped, perhaps to draw breath, while Cousin Jasper stood before him, very silent and very white. The man's narrow eyes turned first to Oliver, who was bursting with unexpressed rage, and then to Janet, who was regarding him with astonished and horrified disapproval. "You do not like my way of talking," he said to her. "I assure you that all I have said is the truth." "Then I should not think," she replied bluntly, "that you would have many friends if you often tell them the truth in just that way." "I have no friends," he declared. "Friends exist only to hurt you. It is my belief that men prosper better alone. Have no illusions, trust nobody, feel that every man's hand is against you, and then you will know where you stand. That is my policy. Your soft-hearted cousin here, his one mistake is that he trusts everyone, he likes everybody. He even trusts me a little, on very small evidence, I can assure you. He would hate me if he could, but because we are of the same blood, he cannot even bring himself to do that. Eh, Jasper, am I not right?" If you think you have said enough to these children," said Cousin Jasper, wincing but still quiet, "perhaps we had better discuss this business further in some other room." "Very well," returned the other, quite good-tempered again. "I should be glad enough to have them hear the whole. But of course, if there are some things that you do not wish known—" He walked away toward the study, quite at his ease, humming a tune and casting sharp, appraising glances about him as though the thought of ownership were already in his mind. The door beyond the hall closed behind them. "What a hateful man!" cried Janet, almost in tears. "Poor Cousin Jasper, and we can't do anything to help him." Oliver, equally miserable, stood at the window. The moon was coming up behind the trees, a great red moon just past the full, misshapen and lopsided, that seemed to be laughing at them. He stamped his foot in angry impotence. "And he doesn't seem to me even to believe in himself. It is as though he were playing a part, just showing off." He pointed through the window at the disgraceful cart and dejected old horse standing before the wide white steps. "I don't think he has to drive that wretched wagon at all. He just does it to make Cousin Jasper look ridiculous." The session in the study was prolonged so late that in the end Janet and Oliver abandoned their sleepy effort to wait until Anthony Crawford should depart, and went dispiritedly upstairs to bed. "I have made up my mind to one thing," said Oliver firmly, as they reached the top of the stairs. "I am going to ask the bee-man what we ought to do. I feel as though I had known him always, and I am sure he can help us." "But ought we to tell him Cousin Jasper's secrets?" objected Janet doubtfully. "And by the way, what is his name? You never told me." "Why, I don't know it," exclaimed Oliver in a tone of complete astonishment. "I never even noticed that I didn't. It doesn't matter. I will ask him tomorrow. And you understand, from the first minute he speaks, that you can trust the bee-man." He went away to his room where, so it seemed to him, he had been asleep a long time before the rattle of wheels aroused him. He peered drowsily through the window and saw the old white horse with its lean erect driver move slowly down toward the gate, long-shadowed and unreal in the moonlight, fantastic omens of some unknown mischief that was brewing. Next morning, as he and Janet left the car beside the orchard wall and climbed the grassy slope of the hill, Oliver's one misgiving was lest the bee-man should not be there. But yes, as they came up the steep path they heard voices and smelled the sharp, pleasant odor of wood smoke drifting down toward them. The wind was high today, singing and swooping about the hilltop, slamming the swinging door of the house, and scattering in all directions such bold bees as had ventured out to ride down the boisterous breeze to the honey-filled meadows below. Janet was as warmly welcomed as Oliver, and they were both bidden to come in and sit down beside the table where Polly was sorting the little wooden boxes in which the bees build the honeycomb. "We were just going to begin a story," said the bee-man. "Polly has been clamoring for it half an hour." "But I wanted to ask you something," broke in Oliver, too much excited for good manners. "Couldn't you wait?" "I believe," said the bee-man slowly, giving him an odd glance that seemed to carry a message of complete understanding, "I believe that sometimes it is better, when you are troubled about something, to cool off and settle down, and come at an affair slowly. And I think this is one of those times." Oliver nodded. He felt quite sure that the bee-man was right.